Professor of Psychology and Religion and Dean of the Chapel, Terry Swan. You are joining us at Cafe on the Square here in downtown Columbia for Lindsey Wilson Conversations. And the way this works is you get to enjoy a beverage of your choice
Great.
while discussing a topic of your choice. And the beverage you have chosen is decaffeinated coffee, and the topic you're going to discuss is your latest book, Soul Explorers, An Invitation to the Called Life. Tell us a little bit about the book and what it's about.
Dwayne, this book was written primarily for persons who feel there's something else in life. They feel close to God, but they're not really sure what else they could do to serve God, and it's to help people to think through the unique gifts and the calling they might have on their lives.
In the book, you talk about how to discern that call. How does someone discern that call?
Yeah, it's not a 1, 2, 3 process. It's interesting because biblical characters have a whole variety of ways that they have come to understand what God wants them to do in life. And so I spend a whole chapter just describing different manners in which you could, hear God in some different ways. You might see God or see evidence of God. You might have experiences that validate that, wow, I really can do these sorts of things. So there's not one way, there's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's why calling is so mysterious for a lot of people.
Has this been a book that you've thought about for a long time during your calling that you've had?
I'd say forever. I tell about how when I was 7 years old, my mother recorded this in her diary that her oldest son got up in the middle of the night, came into her room, and said, "Mom, I think when I grow up I'm supposed to be a minister." And it's kind of like the story of little Samuel in the Old Testament, how he gets in his little linen ephod and goes before the priest, and except I was standing in my Batman underwear, so that was me in that moment. But it was real. It was a real call, and so ever since that time I've always thought about, how can I best serve God, and how can I help others do that?
What is the biggest challenge someone has in terms of discerning their call?
I'd say it's that at the start a lot of people misinterpret and think there's just one thing. Like, oh, I must be a pastor, because that's perhaps whom they see in their church, or work with youth. And it's for persons simply to be open that there are seasons in one's life. And they may have quite a lengthy season that simply means preparation and developing your character and being ready for when the opportune moment comes. Some people suffer from what I've come to call destination disease. They're always looking ahead to what's next instead of just being in the moment and saying, okay, what am I learning from God right now, even if I'm in sort of a season that's not particularly exciting and kind of plodding.
You work a lot with young people who are majors of the Christian Ministries program at Lindsey Wilson. How do some of those students discern their calling?
Well, I think what's especially exciting right now is that there are indeed lots of young adults. There has been a sea change demographically with persons entering church work. If you went back as we're entering the millennium, the average age of a seminarian was 37. 2008, this year, the average entering age of a person coming into seminary is 24. And what I see happening is an entire generation of young adults trying to figure out, how can I serve God best? What's interesting is a lot of them don't really have much contact with the institutional church. They just have had this experience with God. And so I think probably a big issue up front with them is to understand that the church is the vehicle God has typically used to be able to do God's work in the world. And connecting, that's where Lindsey Wilson as a church-related college, really has a special niche in helping people do that call.
You mentioned the average age of a seminarian has dropped 13 years from 37 to 24. What do you think accounts for that?
I don't want to over-mystify it, but since it is a calling, I do believe that when you have periods, you look over church history where it looks like the church is going out the door and attendance wanes and there's little interest in religion, and a revival of sorts comes, just kind of a renewal movement that happens. And I think that's what's occurring right now. It's sort of like God igniting people saying, like Uncle Sam, I want you. I need you to serve me.
In your book, you talk about the pitfalls as well. Talk about those.
Did a whole chapter called The Cautionary Tale. And I have a subtitle in one of the sections which could have been could have been the title for the chapter. It's a phrase you might have heard of, lightning always strikes the tallest trees. And it seems like when people stand up to be counted and say, okay, I'm going to make my mark. I want to do something significant in life. I want to be a world changer. You just see so many of those persons fall into the wayside. And there's lots of ways of looking at it. Richard Foster wrote a book called Money, Sex, and Power, kind of the big three, that seem to derail a lot of people in church work. And there are others, and I just spent a lot of time trying to help people how to understand that when you are putting your best effort forth, God is with you and helping you, but you have to be aware there are also more significant temptations.
The title of your book is Soul Explorers, an Invitation of the Called Life. Where did you come up with that title?
Well, there's an 18th century Puritan minister named Phillips Brooks. He lived on into the 19th century as well. And most people have never heard of him, but they have probably sung the hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem. That's where he's often remembered. And I'd been reading him a number of years ago, and he talked about how there are two types of explorers. There are persons who go off to great geographical locations and, find new places and sites and name them after themselves. And then he says there's also explorers who stay where they are geographically, but they go deep within themselves. And they become persons of substance and character. And I thought, that's your soul. That's your soul's work. And so that's where I came up with that term, soul explorer, becoming a person of depth.
The name of the book is Soul Explorers, an Invitation to the Called Life. Professor of Psychology and Religion and Dean of the Chapel, Terry Swan, thank you for joining us for Lindsey Wilson Conversations.
Thank you very much.